A normal workday can hide storms no one sees coming, and one moment of raw human pain was enough to unravel an entire facade built on lies. What appeared to be routine quickly revealed cracks of cruelty, the kind that had festered unchecked until someone decided to walk straight into the heart of it. What followed was not only a confrontation with abuse, but a revelation so shocking it forced everyone to question who truly holds power and how it should be used. Stay with this story. And before we begin, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more, and tell us your thoughts in the comments along with where you're watching from. Derek Johnson, a black billionaire CEO, was no stranger to the scrutiny of cameras or the weight of expectation. But tonight, as he pulled his baseball cap low and adjusted the collar of his plain jacket, he was not the man the world saw in glossy magazines or televised interviews. He was simply a man returning to his roots, a man born and raised in Detroit, who knew what it meant to feel invisible in a country where the color of his skin had once made him powerless. He had risen above it, had built Thompson Retail into a billion-dollar empire, but as he grew wealthier, more insulated, he feared he had lost touch with the people who kept his company alive. He wanted to see for himself if the ideals he had fought for as a black man in business still thrived in the aisles of his stores. Tonight, he walked not as a CEO, but as an ordinary worker, unrecognized and unseen. The store looked normal on the surface, bright lights, shelves fully stocked, cashiers scanning items with rehearsed smiles, a security guard scrolling on his phone without much attention. It all seemed efficient, polished, the kind of place a quarterly report would praise. But Derek had lived long enough to know that appearances could be deceiving, that sometimes the truth hid beneath a polished surface like rot beneath fresh paint. He wanted to find the truth, and as he walked deeper into the store, he carried with him both suspicion and hope. Suspicion that numbers were lying to him, and hope that his instincts were wrong. He moved through the aisles like a ghost, unnoticed, just another face among many, until the sound stopped him cold. It was faint at first, fragile like glass, a soft trembling noise carried through the fluorescent-lit hallway near the back. As he followed, the sound grew clearer, the unmistakable sound of someone crying, not a few tears shed in private, but the ragged, exhausted sobs of someone whose spirit was breaking. Derek's heart tightened, because he had heard those cries before, not here, but in his childhood, when his mother wept in the kitchen after her hours at the factory had been cut, when she didn't know how to pay rent or keep food on the table. Those sounds were carved into his memory, and now, decades later, they came back to him with terrifying clarity. He turned the corner into the narrow employee hallway, the air colder, harsher, and there on the floor beneath the bathroom door he saw it, a silver name badge, lying abandoned on wet tile. He bent down and picked it up carefully, reading the name engraved, Linda Walker, custodial staff. The crying on the other side of the door sharpened with every second. Derek stood still, the badge in his hand, listening to a truth no report could disguise. The store that corporate praised as a model of success harbored suffering so deep that an employee had been driven to tears during her shift. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Excuse me, are you okay in there?" The sobbing ceased abruptly, followed by hurried shuffling, the sound of someone wiping her face, trying to reassemble the fragments of dignity. A shaky voice answered, "I'm fine, just give me a minute." But Derek knew the difference between fine and broken. This woman was not fine. When the door finally opened, Linda Walker emerged. She was in her early 40s, a white woman whose custodial uniform hung wrinkled and tired on her small frame. Her eyes were swollen and red, her skin rough and dry from cleaning chemicals, her posture weary. She reached for the badge in Derek's hand with trembling fingers, embarrassed, avoiding his eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't be crying. I need to get back to work." Derek studied her carefully, not as a CEO assessing an employee, but as a black man who understood what it meant to live under pressure, to hide pain in order to survive. She was not just tired. She was worn down from years of carrying too much, from nights of too little sleep, from a system designed to keep her desperate. What caught his attention most was not her uniform, nor her exhaustion, but the way she flinched when footsteps echoed from the sales floor, as if authority itself was a whip. She was terrified, and fear like that did not come from nowhere. Derek felt anger rise inside him, not at her, but at the thought that under his leadership, in his company, someone had been reduced to this. His reports claimed 0 complaints, high satisfaction, strong performance. But standing here, he saw the lie. Reports could be polished, managers could manipulate surveys, numbers could be bent, but tears were honest. Tears told the story nobody dared to write down. He offered her the badge, watching her pin it back onto her chest with shaking hands, the small rectangle of metal, now heavy with meaning. That badge wasn't just her job, it was her lifeline, her daughter's future, her rent, her survival. He kept his voice steady, careful not to frighten her more. "I'm new here," he said softly, giving the fake name he had prepared for his undercover role. "I just started today." Linda hesitated, studying his face, unsure whether to trust him. Her shoulders sagged, the weight of her exhaustion pushing her down. If this was happening here, what else had he missed? He decided he could not simply observe from a distance. He had to learn more. Later that night, when the shift slowed and Linda had been tasked with mopping the aisles near the electronics section, Derek approached carefully, not as a CEO, but as the new worker he was pretending to be. "Rough night?" he asked softly. Linda glanced at him, her eyes red, but her voice steady. "Every night's rough. It's just harder lately." She hesitated, clearly torn between staying silent and unburdening herself. Finally, exhaustion won. She leaned on the mop handle and whispered, "They keep cutting my hours. One week I get 35, the next only 15. It changes so much I can't plan anything, can't pay bills, can't even qualify for insurance." Derek's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "That doesn't sound fair. Isn't there some policy about consistent hours?" Linda let out a bitter laugh. "Mr. Miller says it's corporate policy, but the store is always busy. We're always short-staffed. It doesn't make sense." Derek knew the truth instantly. He had signed those policies himself. Full-time workers were guaranteed consistency. Whoever was behind these schedules was breaking the rules deliberately. He looked at the bulletin board Linda gestured toward, covered in messy handwritten changes and crossed-out shifts. Her name appeared inconsistently, scattered across weeks in no pattern. Each cut was not random, it was targeted, designed to keep her below the threshold for benefits. His anger grew sharper, but he forced himself to stay in character. "And the insurance?" Linda's eyes filled with unshed tears. "I asked about it after 90 days, but he told me I wasn't eligible because my hours were irregular. I've been here 3 years. 3 years, and I still have nothing. My daughter's surgery is next month. She needs it, but without insurance I can't afford it. I can't even take out a loan because my hours are too unpredictable." Her voice broke, and she turned away quickly, ashamed of her vulnerability. Derek felt a surge of protective anger, not just as a CEO, but as a black man who had watched his own mother be denied dignity when she worked her hands raw for companies that cared nothing for her. Linda's pain was familiar in its cruelty. He wanted to tell her who he really was, to promise her that things would change, but he knew he had to stay quiet for now. He needed to see how deep this problem went. "You're not alone," he said instead, choosing words that were true but vague. She looked at him uncertainly, then nodded, as if the tiny kindness gave her a sliver of strength. Before she could respond further, footsteps echoed across the floor. A man's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and commanding. "Santos, Walker, what are you doing standing around?" It was Robert Miller, the regional manager whose name Derek had seen on files. Mid-30s, slick hair, and a smirk that radiated arrogance. Linda straightened instantly, gripping the mop tighter, her face carefully blank. Derek stayed silent, watching. Robert's gaze flicked to Linda and narrowed. "This floor is still dirty. What exactly have you been doing for the past hour?" The tiles gleamed so clean Derek could see his reflection, but Linda only nodded. "I'll go over it again, Mr. Miller." Robert's smile curled into something cruel. "You'd better. And when you're done, see me in my office." He turned on his heel and strode away, leaving tension hanging in the air. Derek clenched his fists. He wanted to confront Robert right there, but blowing his cover now would ruin everything. He had to keep watching, As Linda walked reluctantly toward the office, another employee slipped into the break room nearby and collapsed into a chair. James Carter, the young black man Linda had mentioned earlier. His uniform was wrinkled, his shoulders heavy. He muttered to himself, "Third time this week, he's dragged her in there." Derek sat nearby, careful not to reveal too much. What does he say to her? James looked around warily, lowering his voice. Same thing he says to all of us. That we should be grateful to have jobs, that people like us don't get chances like this. Immigrants, single moms, black folks. He knows exactly who he can push around because he thinks nobody will believe us if we complain. His voice carried bitterness edged with fear. Derek's stomach churned. This was bigger than one woman suffering. This was systematic, targeting the vulnerable and keeping them quiet through intimidation. Through the glass of Robert's office, Derek could see Linda standing stiffly while Robert lounged casually in his chair. Then Robert pulled out her timesheet, uncapped a red pen, and began slashing through recorded hours. Derek saw Linda's face crumble even though she tried to stay composed. James whispered, "He's cutting her time again. Last week he did the same to Emily, the cashier who's pregnant. Docked her 3 hours for bathroom breaks. Said she was wasting company time." Derek's blood boiled. His fingers closed around his phone in his pocket. He opened the recording app and pressed the button. Through the thin walls, Robert's voice carried clearly. "If you can't handle the workload without getting emotional, maybe this isn't the right job for you. There are plenty of people who'd be grateful for your position." Linda's voice was faint, desperate. "Please, Mr. Miller, I just need consistent hours." "My daughter, your personal problems aren't my concern," Robert snapped. "What concerns me is that you've been talking to other employees about scheduling. That sounds like troublemaking to me." Silence. Then his voice sharpened. "I'm cutting you back to 12 hours next week. Maybe that'll help you focus. And if I hear you've been stirring up drama again, we'll need to discuss whether you belong here at all." Derek's stomach twisted as he captured every word. This was not just unfair treatment, it was abuse of power, documented now in Robert's own voice. When Linda finally emerged, pale but composed, she walked past Derek without meeting his eyes. Her dignity had been stripped away piece by piece, but she still carried herself with quiet strength. Derek slipped his phone back into his pocket, the evidence secure. It was not enough to know, he had to prove. And now he had proof. He needed more evidence, more context, and more understanding of how Robert operated. By the time dawn broke, Derek had already reviewed the store's staffing data on his laptop, cross-referencing schedules, turnover rates, and payroll reports. The patterns were obvious to him, clear signs of manipulation that somehow never reached corporate oversight. Turnover was listed as voluntary resignations, but the timing matched perfectly with Robert's performance reviews, as though he was clearing out those who dared to resist while presenting himself as an efficiency genius. Derek clenched his fists when he saw how wages dropped while so-called efficiency rose, knowing that behind every number was a worker forced to choose between feeding their kids and keeping the lights on. He decided then that he could not rely solely on observation. He had to place himself directly in the line of fire to experience how Robert treated those he believed had no power. That evening, Derek returned to the store in worn jeans and second-hand boots, his cap pulled low, presenting himself as Marcus Green, a desperate black man with no connections and no safety net. He approached Robert's office and knocked gently, carrying a forged resume that painted him as a former construction worker willing to do anything. Robert looked up from behind his desk, his eyes narrowing as he scanned Derek's face, calculating in the way of a predator sizing up prey. "You looking for work?" Robert asked, his voice dripping with casual authority. Derek nodded with just enough eagerness to appear desperate. "Yes, sir, any shift, any hours. I'll take whatever you got." Robert leaned back, smirking. "I like that attitude. People like you don't complain, they just work. Tell you what, night custodial pays $12 an hour. You'll work with Linda Walker. But don't let her fill your head with her sob stories. She has a tendency to be dramatic." Derek's stomach tightened, but he kept his mask in place, nodding quickly. "That sounds perfect, sir. I'm grateful for the chance." Robert's grin widened. Good. You start tonight, 10 to 6. And remember, loyalty gets rewarded here. Trouble gets punished. Derek accepted the assignment, hiding his disgust behind the mask of gratitude. That night, he changed into work clothes in the store bathroom, pinning a temporary name tag to his chest. The plastic rectangle felt foreign after years of wearing custom-tailored suits, but it grounded him in the role. When he emerged, Linda's eyes widened in surprise. "You came back," she said softly. Derek smiled faintly. "Told you I needed the job." She studied him for a moment, perhaps sensing something different about him, but finally sighed. "Stick close tonight. I'll show you the ropes. And Mike, everything I told you yesterday? Double it for the night shift. That's when Miller does his worst." As the store lights dimmed and customers trickled out, Derek felt the weight of what was to come. The transformation of the store after hours was stark. Without customers to mask the atmosphere, the space revealed its true nature, a cavernous, fluorescent-lit prison where exhausted workers toiled under the invisible whip of Robert's demands. Derek followed Linda through the routine, scrubbing, mopping, hauling supplies. But within the first hour, he began noticing the cracks. Cleaning supplies were dangerously low. Linda rinsed a mop in a bucket that reeked of industrial disinfectant, using the same water for restrooms and break rooms. When Derek asked why, she held up a nearly empty bottle. "Budget cuts," she explained quietly. "Miller says we use too much. This has to last the week." Derek knew corporate allocations. This store was supposed to receive 10 times what he saw. The missing supplies were yet another theft, another way Robert lined his pockets at the expense of safety. At 11:30, Robert appeared, striding through the aisles like a predator on patrol. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness, and when he found Linda restocking paper towels in the restroom, his voice cut like a whip. "Walker, you're too slow. At this rate, you'll be here all morning." Linda straightened. "I'm working as fast as I can, Mr. Miller." His lips curled into a sneer. "Not fast enough. I'm docking 30 minutes from your timesheet." He pulled out his phone and made a note, casual, as if stealing $6 from her was nothing. Derek's blood boiled, but he forced himself to stay hidden, observing. At 1:15, Robert returned with a clipboard. "Walker, Green over here," he barked. They gathered in the main aisle as he consulted his notes. "Corporate's been breathing down my neck about labor costs, so starting next week, we're cutting down. 1 custodian instead of 2 on-night shifts." Linda's face went pale. "Sir, this store is 45,000 square feet. 1 person can't," Robert cut her off. "1 person will. Since you've been here longer, Linda, you keep the job. But the workload stays the same. If you can't handle it, I'll find someone who can." He turned and walked away, leaving Linda slumped against a checkout counter, whispering, "I can't do this whole store alone." Derek stepped closer, his voice low. "If you complain, you'll lose everything, right?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. "My daughter's surgery is scheduled for next month. I need the insurance." Without it, her words trailed into silence, the weight of her fear suffocating. Derek's eyes narrowed. Robert had not just created an environment of abuse. He had constructed a system of entrapment where desperation was currency. Later, as Derek hauled boxes in the back room, he noticed Robert's office door left slightly ajar. Through the gap, he saw the glow of the computer screen. Moving silently, he positioned himself just close enough to see. His stomach turned as he watched Robert logged into the scheduling system, deliberately cutting hours for multiple employees, then transferring them into a phantom employee account labeled B. Miller Jr. Each keystroke was another theft. Wages stolen in real time. Derek pulled out his phone, recording the screen through the crack. Then Robert opened another system, health insurance enrollment. He pulled up Linda's file and reclassified her as part-time temporary, even though her hours clearly made her full-time. With a few clicks, Robert had denied her daughter the surgery she needed. Derek's hand trembled as he recorded. Rage flooded him, but he forced himself to remain silent, to capture every damning moment. At 3 a.m., Robert emerged from his office, satisfied, and immediately ordered Derek to move heavy pallets alone, a job meant for 4. As Derek strained under the weight, his muscles burning, he realized Robert's cruelty was not only about money. He needed to embed himself deeper into the environment, to understand every layer of abuse, and to catch Robert in patterns that proved systematic corruption. He also knew that if Robert was comfortable enough to flaunt his crimes so openly, it meant he felt untouchable, and men who felt untouchable rarely stopped at small schemes. This had to be bigger than one store, and Derek intended to find out just how far the rot went. The following day, he opened his laptop, surrounded by files and reports he had gathered over the past 24 hours. He created a detailed cover identity, expanding the persona of Marcus Green beyond a name and a resume. Marcus became a laid-off black construction worker who had struggled to find work after his company downsized, a man with no family in the area, no safety net, and no prospects. Derek practiced Marcus's posture in the mirror, slouching his shoulders to appear beaten down, adjusting his speech patterns to sound rougher, less polished, more desperate. He knew Robert would exploit anyone he thought he could control, and nothing screamed vulnerability like a man with nowhere else to turn. That night, he returned to the store as Marcus, clocking in for his shift and watching Robert's eyes light up with predatory satisfaction. The manager saw him not as a billionaire CEO in disguise, but as a nameless worker to be broken down and used. "Green," Robert barked, "you're with Walker again tonight. Make sure she doesn't waste time complaining. We have a schedule to keep." Derek forced a quick nod, biting back the urge to confront him. He followed Linda, who glanced at him with wary eyes, still trying to figure out why this new worker seemed different. "You really came back," she whispered as they stocked shelves in silence. "You must need this job bad." Derek nodded. "I do." The hours ticked by with relentless tasks, but Derek paid close attention to everything. The way Robert prowled the aisles at random intervals, the way employees flinched when he called their names, the way he carried his clipboard like a weapon. At one point, Derek watched as Robert cornered James in the break room, his voice raised just enough to humiliate, but not enough to be overheard by customers. "You think you deserve more hours? You should be grateful I let you stay here at all. People like you should know your place." James's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence the product of months of intimidation. Derek recorded the exchange from behind a vending machine, the audio crystal clear. Later, Robert summoned Emily, the pregnant cashier, into his office. Through the glass partition, Derek saw her shoulders slump as Robert waved a red pen over her schedule. When she emerged, her face pale, she whispered to Linda, "He docked me 3 hours for bathroom breaks again. I told him it's the pregnancy, but he said I was lying." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but she squeezed Emily's hand and said nothing. Derek felt his blood boil. These were not isolated acts of cruelty. They were calculated, repeated patterns, designed to force people out or keep them too weak to fight back. He began keeping meticulous notes, documenting every illegal deduction, every violation of policy, every word Robert spoke that revealed his contempt for the people under his command. By 3 a.m., Derek once again found himself hauling heavy pallets alone while Robert lounged in his office. He noticed the phone on Robert's desk ringing at precise intervals, the same distinctive ringtone each time. Robert would answer in hushed tones, speaking for 3 or 4 minutes before hanging up. Derek crept closer during one of these calls and positioned himself behind the supply closet. Through the thin wall, he recorded Robert's side of the conversation. "Walker's hours are down to 12 next week. Chen's at 15. The pregnant one, Emily, she won't last much longer. I've got them all under control. Corporate thinks I'm a genius. Labor costs down, efficiency up. They'll never question it." The voice on the other end was muffled, but Derek could make out enough to know that Robert was not acting alone. This was part of a larger scheme, and Robert was reporting to someone higher. The thought made Derek's stomach churn. It wasn't just one bad manager. It was an entire system of exploitation disguised as efficiency. When Robert ended the call and leaned back in his chair, chuckling to himself, Derek had to grip the wall to keep from storming in. He reminded himself of his purpose. He was not here to lash out. He was here to dismantle the entire operation. By dawn, Derek had gathered hours of new recordings, each more damning than the last. He had captured Robert's threats to James, his discrimination against black employees, his cruelty toward Emily, and his manipulation of Linda's schedule. More importantly, he now had proof that Robert was part of a wider network. As Linda limped to her car at the end of the shift, Derek walked beside her, careful not to break his cover. She looked at him with tired eyes and said, "You should be careful. Miller doesn't like new people." Each night revealed more of Robert Miller's cruelty, and Derek knew he had to keep pushing deeper until he had everything he needed to dismantle this operation. The store, after closing, transformed into something unrecognizable from the cheerful daytime environment customers saw. The bright lights remained the same, but the energy shifted into something heavy and oppressive. Gone were the polite smiles and customer service chatter. In their place were the echoes of mops dragging across tile, the rattling of carts stacked high with boxes, and the constant presence of Robert prowling like a warden making rounds. Derek followed Linda as she guided him through the custodial routine, her limp more pronounced tonight, but her determination unchanged. She explained how every section of the store had to be spotless by morning, from bathrooms to break rooms to sales floors, even though supplies were rationed and the workload designed for failure. He noticed how she stretched each bottle of cleaner, how she cut rags in half to make them last, how she rinsed mop water until it turned black but still reused it. When he asked why, she only shook her head. "Budget cuts," she whispered, though her eyes said the truth. Theft disguised as policy. Derek documented everything, his phone always within reach, recording snippets of conversations and capturing photos of empty supply closets that should have been full. At 11:30, Robert appeared, his footsteps echoing loudly, as if he enjoyed the intimidation his presence brought. He found Linda stocking the paper towel dispensers in the customer restroom and immediately began berating her. "Walker, you're too slow. I could have done this myself in half the time." Derek clenched his fists, but forced himself to keep sweeping nearby, pretending to be too focused to intervene. Linda's reply was calm, measured, but Derek could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "I'm moving as fast as I can, Mr. Miller." Robert smirked and pulled out his phone. "Not fast enough. That's 30 minutes off your pay. Next time, maybe you'll think twice about wasting time." He typed something quickly, casual, as if stealing $6 from her meant nothing. Derek seethed, recording the moment, knowing the pattern of wage theft was becoming irrefutable. At 1:15, Robert summoned both Linda and Derek to the main aisle. Clipboard in hand, he announced a new policy. Corporate wants tighter labor costs. From now on, night custodial is down to one person. This store is 45,000 square feet, but one person can handle it if they work hard enough. Walker, since you've been here longer, the job's yours. Green, we'll see if we can use you elsewhere, but don't get comfortable. Linda's face went pale, and her hands trembled on the mop handle. "Sir, that's impossible. One person can't clean this entire store in 8 hours." Robert's smile turned cruel. "If you can't handle it, I'll find someone who can. Be grateful you even have a job." He turned and walked away, leaving Linda near tears. Derek stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "He can't make you do this alone." Linda shook her head, tears glistening. "If I say anything, I'll lose the job. My daughter's surgery is next month. Without insurance, she won't make it. I don't have a choice." Derek's heart clenched. He wanted to rip off his disguise and promise her that everything would change, but he forced himself to stay in character. He needed more proof. Later that night, as Linda worked double time to keep up, Derek noticed Robert's office door ajar again. He crept closer, keeping to the shadows, and peered through the gap. Robert sat at his computer, logged into the scheduling system, cutting hours for employees across departments. But what made Derek's blood run cold was the second screen. A phantom account labeled B. Miller Jr. had been assigned dozens of hours stolen directly from workers like Linda, James, and Emily. Derek recorded the entire process, his phone capturing each keystroke. Then Robert switched programs to the health insurance system, pulling up Linda's file and altering her classification from full-time to part-time. With a few clicks, he had robbed her daughter of the surgery she desperately needed. Derek's rage surged, but he pressed his back against the wall, breathing slowly to steady himself. He couldn't act yet. He had to let the evidence build until there was no escape for Robert. At 3 a.m., Robert emerged from his office, clipboard in hand, and barked at Derek. "Green, move all the pallets from the stockroom to the sales floor." Now, Derek glanced at the mountain of boxes, easily a job for 4 people. All of them. Robert's eyes narrowed. "You got a problem with that? Because I can find someone who won't whine." Derek forced a nod. "No problem." He spent the next 2 hours hauling heavy boxes until his muscles screamed in pain and sweat soaked his shirt. His back felt like it would split, but he pushed through, telling himself each moment of suffering brought him closer to exposing Robert. He made sure to record snippets of his labor, evidence of unsafe working conditions that violated company policy and federal law. By dawn, Derek was exhausted, but he had more than he came for: video of stolen wages, audio of threats, proof of falsified hours, and first-hand experience of the unsafe conditions Robert forced upon his employees. As the sun began to rise, he saw Linda struggling to finish her tasks, her limp worsening with each step. She winced as she bent to lift a small bag of trash, her body so overworked it could barely endure the weight. Derek realized that while he would go back to his hotel and rest, she would return in a few hours for another shift, trapped in an endless cycle of abuse. He clenched his jaw. This was no longer about evidence for him. This was personal. He had seen how men like Robert exploited his own community, how black workers were humiliated and denied fair treatment because nobody believed them. And now he was watching a white woman suffer under the same cruelty, targeted because she was vulnerable. In that moment, he understood that Robert's abuse had no boundaries except power. He returned to the store under the cover of Marcus Green, his fake identity now firmly entrenched in Robert's mind as just another desperate black worker who should feel grateful to be tolerated. That night, the store felt even heavier, as though the walls themselves carried the weight of exhaustion and fear. Employees shuffled silently through their tasks, heads down, eyes darting nervously whenever Robert's footsteps approached. Derek noticed how every interaction was tinged with dread. James avoided eye contact, Linda winced at every order, and Emily moved slowly with her pregnant belly, while Robert glared at her with thinly veiled contempt. The shift passed in its usual rhythm of exploitation, Robert prowling with his clipboard and phone, until Derek noticed the same pattern he had seen before. Robert's office phone ringing with that distinctive sequence of 2 short bursts, followed by 1 long. Derek positioned himself in the supply closet again, his phone recording, his ear pressed close to the thin wall separating him from Robert's office. He heard Robert answer, his voice low but clear. "Miller here. Yeah, I got the numbers for this week. Walker's hours are cut to 12. Carter's down to 15. Emily's still hanging on, but I'll put her on inventory duty soon. That'll make her quit within a month." Derek's blood ran cold as he realized this was not just a man abusing power on a whim. This was a calculated operation, and Robert was reporting his actions to someone above him. The voice on the other end was muffled, but Derek could make out questions about complaints and documentation. Robert chuckled. "No complaints filed. They're too scared. I've made sure of that. And if anyone asks, I've got fake performance reviews ready. Attitude problems, reliability issues, the usual. On paper, they look like the problem, not me." Derek's hands shook as he captured every word. Robert rustled papers, continuing with his smug explanation. "The beauty of it is corporate sees our labor costs dropping and thinks I'm a genius. They'll never question it. And the best part, I'm billing the cut hours to my nephew's employee ID. Kid's making $800 a week, and he's never set foot in the store. Money goes straight into an account I control." Derek clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. This was beyond corruption at a single location. It was outright wage theft and fraud at a scale that could ruin lives. But the next words were worse than anything Derek had heard so far. "Walker is the perfect target," Robert said casually, his tone almost gleeful. "Single mother, desperate for insurance, daughter sick. She'll put up with anything I throw at her. I could cut her to 0 and she'd still show up begging for hours. And as for Carter, He's just another black kid who should be grateful to be here at all. Who's going to believe him if he complains? Nobody. Not against me. Derek's stomach churned with rage so fierce he had to grip the shelf beside him to keep from bursting into the office. His blood pounded in his ears, every word Robert spoke cutting deeper. He had spent his entire life fighting to be seen as more than his skin color, to prove himself in a world that doubted him. And now here was a man using that same prejudice as a weapon to silence his employees. Robert continued, his voice dripping with arrogance. These people think they're lucky to have a job. They're easy to control. Nobody cares about their sob stories. Corporate wants numbers, and I deliver. End of story. Derek ended the recording and leaned back against the wall, his hands trembling. He had just captured Robert Miller's complete confession, a roadmap of his crimes and the poisonous mindset that fueled them. Wage theft, benefit fraud, targeted harassment, racial discrimination, conspiracy. It was all there, spelled out in Robert's own words. Derek took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He had the smoking gun he needed, but he knew Robert would not stop until someone stopped him. For the rest of the shift, Derek kept close to Linda, watching her move slower than usual, her face pale, her hand pressing to her chest as if the stress and exhaustion were physically crushing her. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly as they cleaned the aisles together. She forced a tired smile. "Just tired. I'll be fine." But Derek could see she was anything but fine. The cruel irony gnawed at him. She was breaking her body to hold onto a job that was being used to rob her of the insurance her daughter needed to survive. When the morning came, Robert emerged from his office, his smile smug, his stack of falsified paperwork neatly tucked under his arm. "Good work tonight," he said casually, as if the lives he had destroyed were mere numbers on a page. "Walker, be here at 2 for inventory. Green, keep proving yourself and maybe I'll find more shifts for you." He walked away whistling, leaving behind a trail of broken spirits. Derek watched Linda hobble to her car, moving as if every step weighed 100 pounds, and he felt something inside him harden into resolve. He could no longer think of this as just an investigation. This was a war for the soul of his company, for the dignity of workers who had been silenced too long. Derek spent the morning stitching everything together into a comprehensive file. He labeled audio clips, attached photos of the chaotic schedule board, and included images of nearly empty supply closets that should have been stocked according to corporate policy. He wrote summaries for each violation and matched them with the evidence, building a case that would not just get Robert fired, but would implicate him in federal crimes. Yet Derek knew evidence alone was not enough. He needed to confront Robert in front of the very people who had been broken by him, to strip away the illusion of power he held over them. He needed to show them that the man they feared was nothing compared to the truth. That afternoon, Derek returned to the store as Marcus Green, blending into the group of employees gathering near the customer service area for the mandatory inventory meeting. About 15 workers stood in a semicircle, including Linda, looking pale and exhausted, James standing silently with his arms crossed, and Emily, visibly pregnant, holding a clipboard with trembling hands. They all looked wary, beaten down, expecting yet another lecture from Robert about working harder for less. Robert strutted into the circle with his clipboard thick with forms, his gelled hair shining under the fluorescent lights, his smirk as arrogant as ever. "All right, people," he barked, "corporate's been breathing down our necks about inventory accuracy. So from now on, any discrepancies come out of your paycheck. Lost merchandise, miscounts, damages, it's all on you." The employees exchanged worried glances, fear etched into their faces. Derek saw Linda clutch her mop handle tighter, her jaw clenched. Robert's eyes found her, and his smirk widened. Maybe if certain people paid more attention to their work instead of worrying about personal problems, we wouldn't need these new measures. The jab cut through Linda like a knife, and Derek saw her shoulders slump under the weight of the humiliation. That was the moment Derek knew it was time. He stepped forward from the back of the group, his voice calm but carrying authority. "Actually, Robert, I think there's something unfair here, but it's not what you think." Robert's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing. "Green, you got something to say?" Derek met his gaze without flinching. Yes, I do. And I've got proof. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the first recording. Robert's voice filled the room, crystal clear. Walker is the perfect target. Single mother, desperate for insurance. I could cut her to zero, and she'd still show up begging for work. Gasps rippled through the circle. Linda's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The other employees murmured, anger building as they realized what they were hearing. Robert's face went pale. What the hell is this? Derek's voice remained steady. This is you, Robert, at 5:30 this morning, bragging about how you manipulate schedules, steal wages, and destroy people's lives. He tapped again, and another recording played. Robert laughing about billing hours to his nephew's fake account. The room erupted in whispers and gasps, employees shaking their heads in disbelief and rage. Robert sputtered, trying to regain control. You recorded me illegally. That doesn't count. Derek's eyes burned with intensity. Michigan is a one-party consent state. Perfectly legal. But what you did, wage theft, benefit fraud, racial discrimination, conspiracy, those are federal crimes. Robert's arrogance cracked, fear creeping into his eyes. He looked around desperately at the employees, but instead of submission, he saw their anger rising. James stepped forward, his voice steady for the first time. You've been stealing from us. You made us feel powerless. Not anymore. Emily nodded, her hand resting on her stomach, her eyes filled with fury. You put my baby at risk for your numbers. You don't deserve to be in charge of anything. Robert's voice rose in a last attempt to assert dominance. You don't know who you're messing with, Green. I'll have you arrested for this. Derek straightened his shoulders, his presence commanding. You think I'm Marcus Green? You're wrong. My name is Derek Johnson. I am the CEO of this company, and you are finished. The silence that followed was deafening. The employees gasped, some covering their mouths, others whispering in shock. Robert's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Derek reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gold badge that read CEO Thompson Enterprises. The employees stared, realization dawning that the man they had worked alongside for days was their boss in disguise. Robert tried to bluster one last time, his voice cracking with desperation. You can't do this. I've got a contract. Derek's voice was cold, unyielding. Fraud voids all contracts. And I've got your confession. Security. 2 uniformed officers, corporate security Derek had arranged earlier, entered the store and walked straight toward Robert. The manager's bravado crumbled. This isn't over, he muttered as they grabbed his arms. Derek stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Robert could hear. Yes, it is. You preyed on the vulnerable. You stole from the desperate. And you did it under my company's name. That ends today. As Robert was escorted out, the employees stood stunned, their eyes wide as they processed the moment. The man who had terrorized them for months, who had controlled their hours and their pay, was gone. Derek turned to them, his voice carrying across the silence. And for all of you, this is just the beginning. No one will ever treat you this way again. The room erupted into murmurs of relief and disbelief, employees finally lifting their heads, their posture no longer bent under fear. Linda stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. You're really the CEO? I am Derek Johnson, he said, his voice steady and commanding. I am the CEO of Thompson Enterprises, and I have failed you. I let people like Robert Miller poison my company while I sat in a boardroom looking at numbers that told me everything was fine. But numbers can lie. People do not. Today, we start correcting every wrong that has been done to you. The employees exchanged uncertain glances, the years of fear not easily shaken. But Derek continued, his presence filling the room. He pulled out his phone and dialed number. Within minutes, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall as a team of professionals entered. Rebecca Chin, the company's head of human resources, followed by 3 specialists carrying laptops and thick files. Rebecca, a no-nonsense woman with years of experience, set up a temporary processing center in the break room. Derek turned to the employees. Every illegal hour cut, every denied benefit, every stolen paycheck will be reviewed today. You will not leave this building until justice is restored." The employees looked at each other in disbelief. Linda, her face still streaked with tears, whispered, "Is this real?" Rebecca called her name first. "Linda Walker, you've been here for 3 years?" Linda nodded cautiously. Rebecca tapped her tablet. "According to Robert's files, you are classified as part-time temporary with no benefits. But according to your actual hours worked, you have been full-time for 34 months straight. Effective immediately, you are classified as full-time permanent with complete health coverage retroactive to your hire date." Linda's knees buckled, and Derek stepped forward to steady her as tears streamed down her face. "My daughter's surgery," she whispered. Rebecca smiled warmly but firmly. "Fully covered. Pre-authorization will be filed today." The sound that escaped Linda's throat was part sob, part laugh, part prayer, and the employees watching began to murmur with hope. Rebecca continued, "Additionally, Linda, you are owed $14,847 in stolen wages and unpaid overtime. A check will be issued within 48 hours." The room erupted into gasps and applause, the first sound of joy the walls of that break room had heard in months. Linda clutched Derek's arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Derek shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. Thank yourself for surviving long enough for me to see the truth. I should have known sooner." Rebecca's team moved quickly through the group. James Carter was called next. His hours had been slashed repeatedly, his record marked with false notes about unreliability. Rebecca corrected his classification, restored his hours, and announced he was receiving $6,000 in back pay. James stood taller, his bitterness dissolving into something stronger: pride. Emily Ross, the pregnant cashier, was trembling as she approached. "I know he marked me down," she said softly. Rebecca confirmed it. "Docked hours for bathroom breaks, marked unreliable. All illegal. Effective immediately. You are placed on paid administrative leave until after your maternity leave ends. Full salary, full benefits, guaranteed position when you return." Emily covered her face with her hands, tears streaming as the other employees applauded. One by one, every worker was seen, their files corrected, their dignity restored. Derek watched the transformation unfold. Shoulders straightened, eyes brightened. For the first time in months, perhaps years, these people were seen not as replaceable labor, but as human beings. When Rebecca's team finished, Derek stepped into the center of the room again. "This was not an isolated problem," he said firmly. "Robert was not a genius manager. He was a thief and a bully, and he will face the consequences. His case has already been referred to federal investigators. Wage theft is a felony, and we will pursue civil action to recover everything he stole, not just from this store, but from every worker he exploited." The employees murmured in astonishment, their fear replaced by the flicker of hope. Derek raised his hand for silence. "But this is not just about punishing one man. This is about rebuilding trust. From this day forward, Thompson Enterprises will change. We are implementing an employee council in every store, representatives elected by you with direct access to corporate leadership. No retaliation, no intimidation. If a manager ever treats you the way Robert did, you will have a voice that cannot be silenced. And if anyone tries, you call me directly." He pulled out a business card, handing it to Linda. "This is my personal number. If anything like this ever happens again, you don't go through a chain of command. You call me." Linda held the card as though it were a lifeline, her hands trembling. Derek turned back to the group. "This company was built on the belief that we take care of our people. I lost sight of that, but you reminded me today. You reminded me that leadership is not about sitting in a boardroom. It's about standing here, in this room, looking you in the eyes and fixing what is broken." For a long moment, the room was silent. Then James spoke, his voice strong. "You kept your promise, Mr. Johnson. You listened." Emily nodded, her hand resting on her belly. The echoes of applause still lingered in Derek's ears long after the break room had grown quiet, long after Rebecca and her team had packed up their laptops and files and assured every employee that their corrections were officially filed. The relief in the workers' faces was something Derek would never forget, but he knew this moment was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of something larger. For years, these employees had been silenced, robbed of their wages, denied their dignity, and made to feel small under Robert Miller's thumb. Now, for the first time, they felt what justice looked like, and it was his responsibility to make sure the fire that had been lit in them never burned out. The next morning, Derek returned to the store, this time not as Marcus Green, the desperate custodian, but as Derek Johnson, the CEO. He walked through the automatic doors without disguise, his head held high, and for the first time, customers and employees alike recognized him. Whispers spread quickly through the aisles, and employees straightened their posture, no longer shrinking from authority, but standing taller with pride. Derek made his way to the employee break room where Linda, James, Emily, and the rest of the team had gathered. He wanted to look them in the eyes not as an investigator, but as their leader. Linda was the first to speak, her voice still trembling with disbelief. "You really are the CEO. I thought maybe I was dreaming last night." Derek smiled softly. "I am Linda, and you weren't dreaming. Everything you heard was real, and everything promised will be delivered." Linda held up the business card he had given her, her hand steady this time instead of trembling. "I believe you now. For the first time in years, I believe someone cares." James stepped forward next, his expression determined. "What happens now, sir?" "Robert's gone, but the system that allowed him to do what he did, that's still here, isn't it?" Derek nodded gravely. "You're right. Robert was a symptom, not the disease. That's why change doesn't end with him being escorted out. We're rebuilding from the ground up, and it starts with you." He explained the employee council system again, emphasizing how they would elect representatives to speak directly to corporate leadership. "You won't be silenced anymore. Your voices will shape how this company moves forward. No more intimidation, no more fake surveys, no more manipulation. You will have power." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You mean it? Even someone like me, who's just a cashier?" Derek's gaze softened. "Especially someone like you. You know what it feels like to be ignored. That makes you the best kind of leader for others who feel the same." The employees looked at one another, murmuring in agreement, a sense of unity forming where there had once been fear. Derek could see the transformation happening in real time. The seeds of trust were taking root. As the day went on, Derek stayed in the store, walking the aisles, talking with employees, listening to their stories. He heard about long nights, skipped meals, unpaid overtime, and constant fear of retaliation. He didn't interrupt, didn't lecture, didn't defend. He just listened, letting them pour out the pain they had bottled up for so long. By the end of the day, the air in the store felt different. Employees were talking to each other, sharing ideas, daring to laugh. Customers noticed too, commenting on the friendly energy that had returned. For Derek, this was proof that treating people right was not just morally correct, but good for business. That evening, Derek gathered the employees once more. "I have one more announcement," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "We are promoting from within. From now on, managers will not be chosen just for numbers on a spreadsheet, but for how they treat their people." Effective immediately, Linda Walker will serve as interim store manager while she completes the management training program. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into cheers. Linda's eyes widened, her mouth opening in shock. "Me? I can't, I'm just..." Derek raised a hand, silencing her doubts. "You are not just anything, Linda. You've been holding this place together for 3 years, working harder than anyone, caring more than anyone. That is what leadership looks like. You will have training, support, and resources. But the heart you already have is something that cannot be taught." Tears streamed down Linda's face as the employees surrounded her with congratulations. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, valued, and chosen not for her willingness to be exploited, but for her strength in surviving. Derek felt a deep satisfaction watching the moment unfold. But he wasn't finished. He turned to James. "You mentioned wanting to move into management. I want you as Linda's assistant. You know this store and you care about the people who work here. That's what matters." James's eyes shone with pride. "I won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't," Derek said with conviction. He turned next to Emily. "Your job is safe, and when you're ready to return after maternity leave, there will be a position waiting for you. No exceptions." Emily clutched her stomach, relief flooding her expression. "Thank you," she whispered. The employees cheered again, their energy no longer one of fear, but of celebration. Derek knew he was witnessing the birth of a new culture. He addressed them all one last time before leaving for the night. "This is what the future of Thompson Enterprises looks like. Not just numbers." Weeks passed since the day Robert Miller was escorted out of the store, and the atmosphere inside the once oppressive walls had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. The break room, which used to be a place of fear and hushed whispers, now echoed with laughter and conversation. Employees who had once dreaded each shift now carried themselves with confidence, knowing that they mattered and that their voices would be heard. Customers noticed the difference too, remarking on how much brighter the store felt, how much friendlier the staff seemed, and how much smoother everything ran. Derek Johnson walked through the aisles one afternoon, no longer undercover, no longer disguised, but openly as the black CEO who had chosen to step down from his tower and into the reality of his workers' lives. As he observed the team, he couldn't help but smile. James was explaining the inventory system to two new hires with the patience of someone who understood their struggles. Emily, glowing with her newborn in her arms during a visit, was greeted with hugs and congratulations. Linda, now wearing business attire with her nameplate reading Store Manager, moved through the store with authority and grace, her limp still present but no longer defining her. She was respected, listened to, and empowered, the very qualities Robert had tried to strip from her. Derek met with her in the office one afternoon, sitting across the desk as she reviewed reports with a focus he admired. "How does it feel?" he asked, gesturing to the nameplate. Linda smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "It feels like I finally matter. For years I thought I was invisible, just a woman pushing a mop. But now I see what I'm capable of. My daughter had her surgery, and she's recovering well. For the first time in a long time, I feel hope." Derek felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You've earned every bit of this. And it's only the beginning." Linda hesitated before pulling out a folder. "I've been talking with other managers, with workers in other stores, even people from different companies. What Robert did isn't unique. It's happening everywhere in retail, in restaurants, in warehouses. People are being robbed of their dignity, and they don't know how to fight back. I think we can do more than just fix our company. I think we can set an example for the entire industry." She showed Derek a draft of a proposal she had been working on, a worker-verified certification system that would hold companies accountable for fair treatment, not based on corporate reports, but on employee voices. Derek read the draft, impressed by the detail, the passion, and the practicality. "This is incredible," he said. "You've taken what happened to you and turned it into a movement. We'll back this fully. Thompson Enterprises will lead the way." Months later, Derek stood on the stage at the National Retail Federation's annual conference, the subject of his keynote address, Leadership from the Ground Up. The auditorium was packed with executives, managers, and workers, all curious about the man whose company had become a national headline for exposing corruption from within. Derek began not with statistics or profit margins, but with a story. 6 months ago, he said, "I heard someone crying in a restroom. That moment changed my life. Because behind those tears was a story of stolen wages, denied health care, and systematic abuse. And behind that story was a truth I had forgotten. Leadership is not about sitting in boardrooms. It is about listening to the people who cannot afford to lose their jobs." He clicked to a slide showing Linda in her custodial uniform on the night she broke down, then another showing her as the store manager, confident and proud. Today, Linda Walker runs one of our most successful stores. Employee satisfaction is at 94%. Customer ratings are up nearly 50%. Profits have risen 23%. And none of that happened because we squeezed our workers harder. It happened because we treated them like human beings. The audience erupted into applause, but Derek raised his hand for silence. This story is not just about Thompson Enterprises. It's about every company, every leader, every person who has the power to make someone else's day better or worse. The question is, are you listening? Because the person crying in that bathroom could be in your company right now. He gestured toward the front row where Linda sat, her daughter Sophia beside her, smiling with health and happiness. The sight of them filled Derek with pride and purpose. We started with one store, but now 12 major retailers have adopted our worker-verified certification system. Millions in stolen wages have been restored across the industry. Federal legislation inspired by these reforms has strengthened labor protections nationwide. Change is possible, but it begins with listening. After the presentation, a young executive approached Derek. "Mr. Johnson," he said nervously, "I think we might have problems in our company too. Where do I start?" Derek handed him a card. "Start by listening, really listening. And when you hear something you don't like, don't rationalize it away. Fix it." That evening, Derek called Linda to check on her, as he often did. "How's Sophia?" he asked. Linda's voice was warm. "She's thriving. She wants to meet you again. She calls you the man who saved Mommy's job." Derek chuckled softly. "Tell her she saved much more than that. She saved a company. She saved me from forgetting what leadership means." Later, as Derek stood by his office window overlooking the Detroit skyline, he reflected on how far things had come. He had built his empire as a black man in America, overcoming prejudice and doubt, but in his pursuit of success, he had almost lost touch with the people who made that success possible. Going undercover had not just exposed corruption. It had reminded him of his roots, of the struggles his mother had faced, of the responsibility he carried. He realized then that true power was not measured by wealth or titles, but by the ability to lift others up, to protect the vulnerable, and to leave a legacy of justice and hope. He closed his eyes, the memory of Linda's sobs still etched in his heart, and whispered to himself, "Never again." The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to hear what you think about Derek's undercover journey, the way he exposed Robert, and how justice was finally restored. Do you believe more leaders should step down from their boardrooms and see what's really happening on the ground? Share your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing the different places this community is tuning in.